Tonight we explore the life and mind of Abraham Lincoln, who rose from a log cabin to the White House, led a nation through its darkest hour, and changed the course of history forever. This is the incredible story of Abraham Lincoln, the man who preserved the Union and ended slavery. Let's dive into the life and legacy of America's 16th president. Before you get comfortable, as always, take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you enjoy our content. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Sometimes our stories keep you up, other times they put you to sleep. Introduction: the measure of a man in the making of a nation. In the vast panorama of American history, few figures loom as large or as luminously as Abraham Lincoln. Towering at 6 feet 4 inches, with a gaunt, melancholy face and a voice marked by frontier cadence, Lincoln became not just a leader of his time, but a symbol for all time. His legacy is carved into marble and memory alike, representing the ideals of unity, liberty, and moral fortitude. Yet behind the mythos of the great emancipator lies a man of profound complexity, self-taught, self-made, and self-aware, who rose from obscurity to become the 16th President of the United States during its most perilous trial. The story of Abraham Lincoln is not simply the tale of a man. It is the story of a nation struggling to define itself, to reconcile its founding ideals with its lived reality, and to survive an existential civil war. Born in a one-room log cabin on the frontier of Kentucky in 1809, Lincoln's early life was marked by poverty, labor, and loss. The son of Thomas and Nancy Hanks Lincoln, he grew up in the wilds of Indiana and Illinois, where physical toil was the measure of a man's worth. Lincoln split rails, read by firelight, and borrowed books in an age when education was a rare luxury in the American backwoods. His mother died when he was 9, an event that left an indelible mark on his spirit. Though formal schooling barely amounted to a year in total, Lincoln possessed an insatiable hunger for knowledge, mastering Shakespeare, the Bible, Euclidean geometry, and Blackstone's commentaries with equal fervor. His ascent from rustic obscurity to national prominence is not merely a tale of personal triumph, but a testament to the porous social structure of antebellum America, where wit, willpower, and words could, occasionally, overcome birth and breeding. Lincoln's genius lay not in inherited wealth or social connections, but in his mind and character. In an age defined by expansion, slavery, and fierce sectional tensions, he brought a moral clarity and rhetorical power that would shape the nation's soul. He was, at his core, a man of paradoxes, a lawyer who hated injustice, a politician who distrusted politics, a melancholic with a gift for humor, a moderate in policy who was radical in principle. He could be calculating and folksy, deeply empathetic, yet capable of ruthless pragmatism. These contradictions, far from diminishing his greatness, render him profoundly human and relatable. By the time Lincoln entered national politics in the 1850s, the United States was teetering on the brink of fragmentation. The expansion of slavery into new territories, especially after the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, had reignited fierce debates that dated back to the nation's founding. Lincoln, who had earlier served a single term in Congress in the 1840s, was drawn back into the political arena not by personal ambition but by a growing sense of moral urgency. His debates with Stephen A. Douglas in 1858, especially the now famous House Divided speech, catapulted him into the national consciousness. Though he lost that Senate race, his eloquence and vision marked him as a rising figure in the newly formed Republican Party, which was coalescing around opposition to the expansion of slavery. To understand Lincoln's political thought is to grasp the moral architecture of American democracy. He revered the Declaration of Independence, especially its assertion that all men are created equal, as a moral compass for the Republic. Yet he was no immediate abolitionist. Rather, Lincoln believed in containing slavery, placing it on the path to eventual extinction. His pragmatism in navigating the constitutional constraints of his office, especially during the Civil War, often masked the depth of his moral convictions. For Lincoln, the Union was not merely a political arrangement but the vessel of a great democratic experiment. The Civil War, then, was not just a conflict between North and South, but between two irreconcilable visions of America. One rooted in human equality, the other in human bondage. When Lincoln was elected president in 1860, it triggered the secession of 11 southern states and the onset of civil war. What followed was the bloodiest conflict in American history, a national crucible that would cost over 600,000 lives. As commander-in-chief, Lincoln bore an almost unbearable burden. He presided over battlefield defeats, cabinet infighting, public criticism, and personal tragedy, including the death of his beloved son Willie. Yet amid this turmoil, he never lost sight of the war's deeper purpose. The Emancipation Proclamation, issued in 1863, transformed the conflict from a struggle to preserve the Union into a moral battle for human freedom. Though it freed only those slaves in Confederate-held territory, it fundamentally altered the character of the war and paved the way for the 13th Amendment, which would abolish slavery altogether. Lincoln's gift for language was matched by his ability to distill profound truths into simple, almost poetic phrases. Nowhere is this more evident than in the Gettysburg Address, delivered in November 1863. In just 272 words, Lincoln redefined the Civil War as a test of the nation's dedication to its founding principles. He spoke of a new birth of freedom, not merely for the sake of the present, but to ensure that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. These words, simple yet sublime, echoed across generations, establishing Lincoln not only as a political leader, but as a prophet of American democracy. Tragically, Lincoln did not live to see the full fruits of his leadership. Just days after General Robert E. Lee's surrender at Appomattox Courthouse in April 1865, Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth, a Confederate sympathizer. His death was mourned across the nation, and even his former enemies came to acknowledge his greatness. The man who had been mocked as a rail splitter and a country bumpkin was transformed in death into a near-mythical figure. Walt Whitman called him the grandest figure on the crowded canvas of the drama of the 19th century. Yet myth can obscure the man. Lincoln was not perfect. His views on race evolved over time, and his use of executive power was sometimes controversial. But he never claimed perfection. What sets him apart is the moral seriousness with which he approached the tasks of leadership, his deep humility, and his unwavering belief in the power of democratic ideals to shape a better future. In an era of cynicism and polarization, Lincoln's legacy endures as both a mirror and a beacon, a mirror reflecting the contradictions of American history and a beacon illuminating the possibilities of justice, unity, and moral courage. Thus, to study Abraham Lincoln is not merely to chronicle a life, it is to confront the fundamental questions of what kind of nation America was, is, and hopes to be. His story is inseparable from the story of the Republic itself, and in understanding him, we come closer to understanding ourselves. The humble beginnings of Abraham Lincoln, a journey from log cabin to legacy. Before Abraham Lincoln became the revered president who led the United States through its bloodiest war and signed the Emancipation Proclamation, he was simply a poor boy from the backwoods of Kentucky. His early life was anything but glamorous. There were no private tutors, no formal education, and certainly no silver spoons. Instead, his story began in a one-room log cabin with a dirt floor and no windows nestled in the rugged American frontier. It was here, in these harsh and humble surroundings, that the character and values of one of history's greatest leaders were forged. Born on the edge of the wilderness, Abraham Lincoln was born on February 12, 1809, in Hardin County, Kentucky, now known as LaRue County. His birthplace was a modest cabin on Sinking Spring Farm. His parents, Thomas and Nancy Hanks Lincoln, were farmers of modest means. They weren't wealthy landowners, but hardworking, religious people who lived off the land and did their best to provide for their children. Lincoln was the second child. His older sister, Sarah, had been born 2 years earlier, and the family would later welcome a younger brother, Thomas Jr., who died in infancy. The Lincolns were part of a struggling, westward-moving population of Americans, carving out a living from the land as the young nation expanded into new territories. While Kentucky had been a slave-holding state, the Lincolns were opposed to slavery. This is important because it shaped young Abraham's early exposure to the moral conflict that would define much of his later life. His father, Thomas, moved the family to Indiana in 1816, in part to escape the legal entanglements of land disputes and the presence of slavery. Indiana was a free state, and the move marked the beginning of a new chapter in Abraham's early years. A childhood marked by loss. Life on the frontier was never easy, and young Abraham's childhood was full of hardships. In 1818, when he was just 9 years old, his mother Nancy died of milk sickness, a mysterious illness caused by drinking the milk of cows that had eaten poisonous white snakeroot. Her sudden death was devastating, and Abraham would later say that much of what was good in him came from her. Only a year later, in 1819, Thomas Lincoln remarried. His new wife, Sarah Bush Johnston, was a widow with 3 children of her own. Fortunately for young Abraham, Sarah turned out to be a kind and loving stepmother. She encouraged his learning and treated him as one of her own. Abraham would grow to love and respect her deeply, often referring to her as mother for the rest of his life. This period of his life was defined by physical labor and limited schooling. Formal education on the frontier was scarce. Lincoln later estimated that the total amount of time he spent in a traditional classroom was less than 1 year. Yet he had a deep thirst for knowledge. He read whatever books he could find, often walking miles just to borrow one. Among his favorites were the Bible, Aesop's Fables, Robinson Crusoe, and the Life of George Washington. These books helped shape his worldview and taught him the power of language, storytelling, and moral clarity. The rail splitter reputation. As he grew older, Lincoln earned a reputation as a strong and hardworking young man. He split rails to build fences, hence his nickname, the rail splitter, cleared fields, and did various farm chores. He worked for neighbors and contributed to the family's livelihood. Despite his thin frame, he was known for his strength and endurance. Yet even as he labored with his hands, his mind was always working. He would often write poetry and keep notes on scraps of paper, sometimes using coal or bark when he lacked ink and proper paper. His quiet, bookish demeanor set him apart. He was known for his wit, honesty, and a sense of fairness that seemed beyond his years. Though he didn't have formal mentors, the people around him noticed that he was destined for something greater than chopping wood or running a farm. By his late teens, Lincoln began working more independently, taking jobs as a flatboatman, store clerk, and mill hand, moving to Illinois and stepping into the world. In 1830, when Abraham was 21, the Lincoln family moved again, this time to Illinois. Like their earlier moves, This one was motivated by a search for better land and opportunity. Soon after settling there, Abraham struck out on his own. He found work in New Salem, a small but lively village, and quickly became a local favorite. He ran a store, served as the postmaster, and even helped manage a mill. He also began reading law books in his spare time, showing an early interest in justice and public service. New Salem marked a turning point. Here, Lincoln began to refine his public speaking skills and develop his leadership abilities. In 1832, at the age of 23, he ran for the Illinois state legislature. He lost that election, but the experience taught him important lessons in politics and public life. 2 years later, he ran again and won. This was the beginning of Lincoln's career in public service, but the roots of his leadership had been planted long before. The trials of his youth, the hard labor, the crushing losses, the hunger for learning, and the deep connection to common people would never leave him. They shaped his empathy, humility, and moral compass. A boy of the people. What makes Abraham Lincoln's early life so compelling isn't just the poverty or hardship. It's the way he rose above it. He never forgot where he came from. He spoke the language of common folk because he was one of them. He respected hard work, honesty, and the power of a good story. These traits would later make him not just a great politician, but a deeply beloved leader. Even as president, he remained grounded in the values of his upbringing. He often referred back to his youth and the people who had shaped him: his mother, his stepmother, his neighbors, and the quiet, wooded places of Indiana and Illinois. They gave him more than a childhood. They gave him a sense of who he was and what he stood for. Abraham Lincoln's early life may not have been filled with wealth or privilege, but it was rich in the lessons that truly matter: perseverance, kindness, learning, and integrity. From a simple log cabin in the woods to the highest office in the land, Lincoln never let go of the things he learned growing up. His journey from frontier boy to national hero remains one of the most inspiring stories in American history, a reminder that greatness often comes from the humblest beginnings. Abraham Lincoln's political journey before the presidency, from prairie politician to national voice. When most people think of Abraham Lincoln, they picture the president during the Civil War, solemn, thoughtful, issuing the Emancipation Proclamation or delivering the Gettysburg Address. But long before he entered the White House, Lincoln spent decades building his political career. His rise wasn't meteoric or easy. It was a slow, steady journey shaped by setbacks, self-education, and a deep moral compass. By the time he became the 16th President of the United States, he had already spent years as a local legislator, lawyer, and public thinker, laying the groundwork for the greatness to come. The young man from New Salem. After leaving his family in 1831, a 22-year-old Abraham Lincoln settled in New Salem, Illinois, a small frontier town where he quickly made a name for himself. He was tall, honest, and had a gift for storytelling. People liked him. He tried a number of jobs: store clerk, postmaster, surveyor, and even co-owned a general store, though that business failed and left him in debt for years. In 1832, he took his first step into politics by running for the Illinois state legislature. He lost, but the experience sparked something in him. That same year, he served briefly in the Black Hawk War, a conflict with Native American tribes. Though he saw no combat, he was elected captain of his volunteer company, a leadership role that gave him a taste of command and earned him the respect of his peers. Illinois State Legislature, 1834 to 1842. Lincoln tried again in 1834 to win a seat in the Illinois House of Representatives. And this time he succeeded. He was just 25 years old. He would be re-elected 3 more times, serving a total of 8 years. As a state legislator, Lincoln was a member of the Whig Party, which supported a strong national government, internal improvements like roads and canals, and economic modernization. He believed in using the government to help grow the country, particularly through infrastructure and commerce. These views often put him at odds with the dominant Democratic Party, which championed states' rights and limited federal power. Lincoln quickly gained a reputation for honesty, logic, and fairness. He wasn't flashy or loud, but he was effective. He also formed important relationships during this time, including a lifelong friendship with Joshua Speed and political partnerships with other Illinois Whigs. One of Lincoln's major early political positions was his opposition to slavery's expansion. While slavery was still legal in many southern states, it was a hot topic even in Illinois. Though Lincoln did not yet call for abolition, he consistently argued against extending slavery into new U.S. territories, a stance that would later define his national political identity. The Springfield Years and the Lawyer's Life. In 1837, Lincoln moved to Springfield, Illinois, the new state capital. He began practicing law full-time, partnering with John T. Stewart and later with William Herndon. Lincoln traveled constantly, riding the circuit from county to county to argue cases in front of judges and juries. He became known as a skilled, practical, and persuasive lawyer. He often represented small farmers, debtors, and railroads alike, building a legal reputation that complemented his political ambitions. Lincoln's law career was more than just a profession. It sharpened his ability to argue, to see both sides of an issue, and to use clear, simple language to persuade people. These skills would serve him well when he returned to national politics. U.S. House of Representatives 1847 to 1849. After several years away from elected office, Lincoln made a leap to the national stage. In 1846, he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives as a Whig from Illinois. He served a single 2-year term during the presidency of James K. Polk. During his time in Congress, Lincoln took several bold positions. Most notably, he opposed the Mexican-American War, which he viewed as an unjust conflict driven by expansionist motives. He introduced what became known as the spot resolutions, asking President Polk to specify the exact spot where American blood had been shed on American soil, a challenge to the legitimacy of the war's cause. While principled, this stance was unpopular with many voters back home, who saw it as unpatriotic. Lincoln also spoke out against slavery in Washington, D.C., proposing a plan for gradual emancipation in the capital. Though the bill never passed, it showed his growing discomfort with slavery and his willingness to act on his convictions even if it cost him politically. After his term ended in 1849, Lincoln didn't seek re-election. Disillusioned by the infighting and limited impact he had in Congress and facing backlash from constituents over his anti-war views, he returned to Springfield and resumed his law practice. For the next several years, it seemed like his political career might be over. The Kansas-Nebraska Act and political reawakening. In 1854, Lincoln's political passion was reignited by the passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Introduced by Senator Stephen A. Douglas, the bill allowed settlers in those territories to decide for themselves whether to allow slavery, a concept known as popular sovereignty. This effectively repealed the Missouri Compromise, which had prohibited slavery north of a certain latitude and opened the door for slavery's expansion. To Lincoln, this was a moral and political disaster. He believed the nation had been on a slow path toward ending slavery, or at least limiting it. now that progress was being undone, Lincoln re-entered public life with new energy. He gave speeches across Illinois warning that the expansion of slavery threatened the nation's future. He argued that slavery was fundamentally wrong and should not be allowed to spread, even if that meant standing up to popular opinion or powerful political figures. His speeches gained attention, and Lincoln emerged as a leading voice for a new movement, the Republican Party, formed in opposition to the spread of slavery. The Lincoln-Douglas Debates, 1858. Lincoln's political comeback reached its peak in 1858 when he ran for the U.S. Senate against Stephen A. Douglas, the architect of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. The two men agreed to a series of public debates, 7 in total, held across Illinois. These debates were unlike anything the country had seen before. Thousands of people attended. Newspapers printed full transcripts. The nation listened. Lincoln, the challenger, framed the debates around a powerful question: could the United States endure permanently half slave and half free? In his famous House Divided speech, he warned that the country could not remain divided on this moral issue. Douglas argued for popular sovereignty, insisting that territories should decide for themselves. Lincoln countered that moral wrongs shouldn't be left to majority rule. Though he lost the Senate race, Lincoln gained national recognition. The debates catapulted him into the national spotlight and set the stage for his presidential run just 2 years later. Abraham Lincoln's political career before the presidency was not marked by rapid success or dramatic victories. It was a slow climb shaped by persistence, principle, and preparation. He lost more elections than he won. He endured criticism, defeat, and political exile. But at every stage, he grew, honing his beliefs, sharpening his rhetoric, and building a reputation for honesty, logic, and courage. By the time he won the presidency in 1860, Lincoln wasn't just a politician, he was a man who had been tested, challenged, and strengthened by years of struggle. His early political life laid the foundation for the leader he would become. A man of the people, rooted in reason, driven by justice, and ready to hold the nation together in its darkest hour. Abraham Lincoln's presidency, 1861 to 1865, leading a nation through its darkest hour. When Abraham Lincoln took the oath of office on March 4, 1861, the United States was already beginning to fall apart. 7 southern states had seceded from the Union before he even entered the White House, and more would follow. He was an untested president from a new political party facing a country on the brink of civil war. Yet over the next 4 years, Lincoln would grow into one of the greatest leaders in American history. His presidency was marked by extraordinary pressure, historic decisions, and an unshakable belief in the promise of democracy. The country divides, the beginning of the Civil War. Lincoln's election in November 1860 sparked a crisis in the South. Fearing that his administration would abolish slavery, southern states began seceding from the Union. By the time he was inaugurated in March 1861, South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas had already left. They formed the Confederate States of America, electing Jefferson Davis as their president. Lincoln's first major test came just over a month into his presidency. On April 12, 1861, Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. The Union troops eventually surrendered, and the Civil War had officially begun. Lincoln responded by calling for 75,000 volunteers to defend the Union. In response, for more states, Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee joined the Confederacy. Lincoln's goal at the start of the war wasn't to end slavery. It was to preserve the Union. He believed the United States had to survive as a single nation, not just for Americans, but as a symbol of democracy for the world. A wartime president. As commander-in-chief, Lincoln faced the overwhelming challenge of leading a divided and bloodied nation. He had no formal military training, but he learned quickly. He spent countless hours at the War Department, reading battle reports and telegrams, meeting with generals and analyzing maps. He fired ineffective commanders and eventually promoted Ulysses S. Grant, who proved to be a bold and relentless leader. Lincoln's leadership during the war was deeply personal. He wrote letters to the families of fallen soldiers, agonized over troop deaths, and visited wounded veterans. He often walked to Union hospitals in Washington, D.C., to speak with soldiers directly. He carried the weight of every casualty. The Civil War dragged on longer than anyone expected, with staggering losses on both sides. At battles like Antietam, Gettysburg, and Shiloh, tens of thousands of men were killed or wounded. Throughout it all, Lincoln stayed focused on his belief that the Union must be saved. No matter the cost, emancipation, and the moral turn. While Lincoln began the war focused on Union, his views on slavery evolved as the war progressed. By 1862, he began to see emancipation not just as a moral necessity, but as a military strategy. Freeing enslaved people in the South would weaken the Confederacy's economy and war effort, while also giving the Union a powerful moral cause. On January 1, 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. It declared that all slaves in the Confederate States shall be thenceforward, and forever free. While it didn't immediately free all enslaved people, only those in rebellious areas, it changed the purpose of the war. The fight was no longer just about preserving the Union, it was also about ending slavery. The proclamation had a massive impact. It encouraged nearly 200,000 black men to join the Union Army and Navy, giving the North a boost in manpower and morale. It also signaled to the world that the United States was committed to human freedom, discouraging European powers like Britain and France from supporting the Confederacy. The Gettysburg Address, words that endure. One of Lincoln's most powerful moments as president came on November 19, 1863, when he delivered the Gettysburg Address. The speech, just over 2 minutes long, was given at the dedication of a cemetery for soldiers killed at the Battle of Gettysburg, a turning point in the war. In just 272 words, Lincoln redefined the American cause. He reminded the nation that it was conceived in liberty and founded on the idea that all men are created equal. He spoke of a new birth of freedom and called on the living to finish the work of those who had died to preserve the Union. The speech remains one of the most revered and quoted in American history. Re-election and the road to victory. In 1864, Lincoln faced re-election. The war was still raging and public opinion was divided. Some people believed Lincoln had gone too far, others thought he hadn't done enough. His Democratic opponent, former Union General George B. McClellan, campaigned on the idea of negotiating peace with the Confederacy. But a series of Union victories in the summer and fall of 1864, especially the capture of Atlanta by General Sherman, boosted Lincoln's popularity. He won re-election with a strong majority, signaling that the American people still believed in him and his mission. Lincoln's second inaugural address, delivered on March 4, 1865, reflected his deep sadness over the war's destruction and his hope for reconciliation. He famously said the nation should move forward with malice toward none, with charity for all, calling for healing and peace. The end of the war and a tragic ending. By the spring of 1865, the Confederate forces were collapsing. On April 9th, General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. The war was effectively over. Lincoln had preserved the Union, but he wouldn't live to see the full results of his efforts. Just 5 days after Lee's surrender, on the evening of April 14, 1865, Abraham Lincoln was shot by Confederate sympathizer John Wilkes Booth while attending a play at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. He died the next morning. The nation plunged into mourning. Lincoln became the first U.S. president to be assassinated. His death shocked the country and left many wondering what would happen next. But his legacy was already secure. Legacy of Lincoln's presidency. Lincoln's presidency transformed the nation. He preserved the Union, ended slavery, and helped redefine what America stood for. Under his leadership, the country passed the 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery in all states, a goal he had worked tirelessly toward. More than just political achievements, Lincoln gave the American people a sense of shared identity. He believed in government of the people, by the people, for the people, and he modeled what moral leadership looks like in times of crisis. His empathy, intellect, and unshakable commitment to justice still inspire leaders around the world today. Abraham Lincoln's presidency was forged in crisis, defined by moral clarity and sealed by sacrifice. From the moment he stepped into office, he faced challenges no other American president had ever encountered. But through courage, compassion, and conviction, Lincoln not only saved a fractured nation, he reshaped it. He didn't live to see the peace he worked so hard to secure. Yet his vision of freedom and equality lit a path forward. In the end, Lincoln's presidency was not just a chapter in American history, it was a turning point that changed the course of the nation forever. Abraham Lincoln's Civil War leadership, guiding a nation through fire. Abraham Lincoln's presidency was shaped entirely by war. When he entered office in 1861, the United States was already falling apart. By the time he left, through death, not choice, he had led the country through its bloodiest conflict and helped give birth to a new, freer America. His leadership during the Civil War was not just about strategy and politics. It was about holding a broken nation together, navigating impossible choices, and always keeping sight of the greater purpose, a unified country and the end of slavery. Though he had no military background, Lincoln became one of the most important wartime leaders in history, not because he was perfect, but because he grew into the role with humility, strength, and resolve. A leader without experience. When Lincoln became president, many doubted whether he was ready for the challenge. He had never served in national military command, and his only military experience was briefly leading a militia during the Black Hawk War in 1832, where he never saw combat. The Civil War, however, was unlike any previous American war. It was long, deadly, and personal. It pitted brother against brother, neighbor against neighbor. Rather than retreat into inaction, Lincoln threw himself into learning. He read military manuals, studied maps, and surrounded himself with experts. He became a hands-on commander-in-chief, often spending time in the War Department next to the White House, receiving up-to-date reports via the telegraph, a new invention he embraced wholeheartedly. Lincoln learned quickly that successful leadership in wartime wasn't just about battlefield tactics, it was about choosing the right people, setting a clear moral tone, and keeping a divided country united. Struggles with military command. One of Lincoln's biggest challenges early in the war was finding the right generals to lead Union forces. At first, he struggled with commanders who were either too cautious or too politically minded. General George B. McClellan, for example, was well-liked by his troops and good at organizing armies, but he was overly hesitant on the battlefield. Lincoln grew frustrated with McClellan's delays and reluctance to attack Confederate forces, even writing, "If General McClellan does not want to use the army, I would like to borrow it for a time." Eventually, Lincoln made the difficult decision to remove McClellan from command. It wasn't the last time he would fire a general. He cycled through several others, Burnside, Hooker, and Meade, searching for someone who could deliver decisive victories. That leader finally came in the form of Ulysses S. Grant, a tough, unpretentious general from the Western theater of the war. Grant was willing to fight aggressively and understood the importance of total war. When Lincoln promoted Grant to general-in-chief in 1864, he found in him the military partner he had long sought. Grant didn't always win quickly or cleanly, but he fought with a clarity of purpose that matched Lincoln's vision. A master of communication. Lincoln understood that leading during war wasn't just about issuing orders, it was about shaping public opinion and maintaining morale. He was a master communicator, using speeches, letters, and personal visits to keep people engaged in the cause. His speeches were simple but powerful. When he spoke, he appealed to both the head and the heart. The Gettysburg Address, delivered in 1863, wasn't just a speech at a cemetery dedication. It was a redefinition of the American mission, an affirmation that the war was being fought so that government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from the earth. Lincoln also wrote countless personal letters, many of them handwritten and heartfelt. He would console grieving parents, thank soldiers, or offer measured advice to military leaders. These messages revealed a president who cared deeply about the people he served, even amid immense pressure. Political leadership in a time of war. While managing the war effort, Lincoln also had to navigate the stormy waters of wartime politics. His critics accused him of overreaching his power, especially when he suspended habeas corpus, a legal protection against unlawful imprisonment, in certain areas to prevent Confederate sympathizers from undermining the Union. Lincoln believed this was necessary to save the Union, famously saying, "Must I shoot a simple soldier boy who deserts, while I must not touch a hair of a wily agitator who induces him to desert?" He walked a fine line between maintaining civil liberties and protecting national security. He also faced constant pressure from both sides of the political spectrum. Some radical Republicans demanded faster action on emancipation and harsher punishment for the South, while more conservative voices wanted peace, even if it meant keeping slavery. Lincoln navigated these tensions by staying focused on unity and justice, never moving too fast or too slow, but always forward. Emancipation, a bold moral decision. One of Lincoln's most important acts as a wartime leader was issuing the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863. This didn't just free enslaved people in Confederate states, it changed the entire nature of the war. No longer was it just a battle to preserve the Union, it became a fight for human freedom. Lincoln had waited for a Union military victory to make the announcement, knowing that issuing it from a position of strength would give it more legitimacy. The proclamation allowed black men to enlist in the Union Army, adding crucial manpower and further weakening the Confederacy's labor system. While the proclamation didn't end slavery outright, that would come with the 13th Amendment, it signaled a new moral high ground. Lincoln showed that leadership wasn't just about strategy, it was about values. Empathy, humor, and human touch. What made Lincoln's leadership truly unique was his humanity. He felt the war deeply and personally. He often visited wounded soldiers, hosted public receptions at the White House, and told stories to lighten the mood. His sense of humor, though sometimes dark, helped him survive the emotional toll of the war. He was known to slip away quietly to nearby hospitals, offering words of comfort or holding the hands of injured soldiers. He mourned every death, whether it came from battle or disease. When his own son Willie died in 1862, Lincoln was devastated, yet he returned to his duties with a heavy heart, never letting personal grief halt national responsibility. His empathy gave strength to the nation. People believed he understood their suffering because he suffered too. Victory and assassination. In early 1865, Union forces finally began to break the Confederacy's defenses. On April 9th, General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, effectively ending the war. Lincoln had accomplished what many thought impossible. He had preserved the Union. But just 5 days later, on April 14, 1865, Lincoln was shot by John Wilkes Booth, a Confederate sympathizer, while watching a play at Ford's Theater. He died the next morning, leaving the country in mourning and uncertainty. His leadership in war had saved the Union, but his absence in peace left a nation struggling with the road ahead. Legacy of wartime leadership. Abraham Lincoln's leadership during the Civil War remains one of the most studied and admired examples of executive leadership in history. He balanced military decisions with moral clarity, handled pressure with patience, and communicated vision with simplicity and strength. He didn't just fight a war, he led a nation through it with intelligence, heart, and unwavering purpose. His presidency proved that great leadership isn't about having all the answers at the start, but about learning, adapting, and always leading with conviction. Abraham Lincoln, Emancipation, and the End of Slavery, a president's moral journey. Abraham Lincoln is often remembered as the great emancipator, the president who ended slavery in America. But his path to that legacy was not simple or immediate. Lincoln's relationship with slavery was shaped by personal conviction, political calculation, and the moral weight of leading a divided nation through civil war. His views evolved over time, and his choices, particularly the Emancipation Proclamation, transformed both the purpose of the Civil War and the future of the United States. In many ways, Lincoln's story is also the story of how America confronted its greatest moral crisis. Lincoln's early views on slavery. Abraham Lincoln was born in 1809 in Kentucky, a slave-holding state, but he was raised in Indiana and Illinois, free states. Though he grew up in a nation where slavery was legal in the South and deeply woven into the economy, Lincoln personally believed slavery was wrong. He once said, "If slavery is not wrong, nothing is wrong." However, early in his political career, Lincoln didn't call for immediate abolition. Instead, he focused on stopping its spread into new U.S. territories. As a lawyer and politician, Lincoln respected the Constitution, which at the time allowed slavery in states where it already existed. He hoped that if slavery could be contained, it would eventually die out on its own. He believed slavery was a moral evil, but also knew the political system of his time was not yet ready for drastic action. This position helped him win support from Northern voters who opposed the spread of slavery but were not ready to support full abolition. The Political Balancing Act. When Lincoln was elected president in 1860, his stance against the expansion of slavery alarmed the Southern states. Fearing for their economic and political power, they began to secede from the Union even before he took office. Lincoln insisted that he had no intention of interfering with slavery where it already existed, but he firmly opposed allowing it to grow. When the Civil War began in 1861, Lincoln made it clear that his goal was to preserve the Union, not to end slavery. He worried that moving too fast on emancipation would drive the border states, slaveholding states like Kentucky, Missouri, and Maryland that had stayed loyal to the Union, into joining the Confederacy. The stakes were enormous. If Lincoln lost those states, he might lose the war. At the same time, growing numbers of Northerners, including members of Lincoln's own Republican Party, were demanding stronger action against slavery. Abolitionists, black leaders like Frederick Douglass, and thousands of enslaved people fleeing to Union lines pressured the government to recognize that slavery was the root cause of the conflict. The turning point, the Emancipation Proclamation. By mid-1862, Lincoln began to see emancipation as not just a moral necessity, but a military strategy. Slavery was helping fuel the Confederate war effort, providing labor and freeing up white men to fight. If the Union could strike at slavery, it could weaken the South's ability to continue the war. On September 22, 1862, after the Union victory at the Battle of Antietam, Lincoln issued a preliminary warning: if the Confederate States did not return to the Union by January 1, 1863, he would declare their enslaved people free. The South ignored the warning. So, on January 1, 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which declared, "All persons held as slaves within any state, in rebellion against the United States, shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free." It was a bold and historic move. The proclamation didn't free every enslaved person, only those in Confederate-controlled areas. Slavery still legally existed in border states and some Union-occupied southern regions. But the impact of the proclamation was massive. It changed the very meaning of the Civil War. The fight was no longer just about preserving the Union, it was now about freedom. The impact of emancipation. The Emancipation Proclamation had far-reaching consequences, even if its legal effect was limited at first. 1. It gave moral clarity to the war. The Union was now officially fighting for human liberty. This made it harder for European countries, especially Britain and France, which had already abolished slavery, to support the Confederacy. 2. It allowed black men to fight for their own freedom. Nearly 200,000 African Americans joined the Union Army and Navy after the proclamation, playing a critical role in the North's eventual victory. 3. It signaled the beginning of the end for slavery. While the proclamation didn't abolish slavery everywhere, it laid the foundation for complete abolition. It also gave hope and momentum to the millions of enslaved people seeking freedom. Lincoln understood that to make emancipation permanent, he needed a constitutional amendment. The 13th Amendment, which banned slavery in all parts of the United States, was passed by Congress in January 1865 and ratified later that year after Lincoln's assassination. Lincoln and Black Americans. While Lincoln was not an abolitionist in the radical sense, he gradually grew into the role of emancipator. Over time, he listened more closely to black leaders, rethought earlier views about colonization, the idea that freed slaves should be sent to Africa, and came to support limited black voting rights. In his final public speech, given just 3 days before his assassination, Lincoln praised the bravery of black soldiers and suggested that educated black men should be allowed to vote. For many white Americans at the time, this was a radical stance. Frederick Douglass, the famous abolitionist, initially criticized Lincoln for moving too slowly. But after the war, Douglass would say that Lincoln was emphatically the black man's president and that he was the first great man that I talked with in the United States freely. Legacy of Emancipation. Lincoln's legacy as the emancipator is both celebrated and debated. He didn't start out as a crusader for abolition. His first and foremost goal was to save the Union. But he evolved. He listened. He acted. In the end, he did what no president before him had dared to do. He broke the chains of slavery. Today, Lincoln is rightly remembered for his courage and vision. His Emancipation Proclamation didn't end slavery by itself, but it fundamentally reshaped the nation's identity. From that moment on, America could no longer define itself as half slave and half free. The country had taken a giant step toward fulfilling the promise of liberty and justice for all. Abraham Lincoln's journey with slavery and emancipation was not one of overnight transformation. It was a difficult path filled with political tension, moral struggle, and war. But in the crucible of the Civil War, Lincoln rose to meet the moment. He turned a nation's greatest shame into its defining victory, not just preserving the Union, but pushing it closer to its founding ideals. In ending slavery, Lincoln didn't just change the law. He changed the course of American history. Legacy and assassination of Abraham Lincoln, the death that shaped a nation. Abraham Lincoln is remembered as one of the greatest presidents in American history. His leadership during the Civil War, his dedication to preserving the Union, and his moral stand against slavery reshaped the United States forever. But just as the war ended and hope for healing began, Lincoln's life was cut short by an assassin's bullet. His shocking death sent waves of grief across the country and solidified his place as a martyr for liberty and unity. Yet his true legacy lies not only in how he died, but in how he lived and how his vision still guides America today. A nation on the brink of peace. By April 1865, the Civil War was nearly over. After 4 long years of bloodshed, Union forces had finally broken the Confederate resistance. On April 9th, General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Ulysses South Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. The war that had taken more than 600,000 lives was ending. In Washington, D.C., people celebrated in the streets. Lincoln, weary but relieved, spoke of rebuilding the nation, not through punishment, but through healing. In his second inaugural address, delivered just weeks earlier, he had urged Americans to proceed with malice toward none, with charity for all, and to bind up the nation's wounds. His vision was clear: reunite the country, end slavery, and create a lasting peace. But Lincoln's plans would never fully come to life. Just days after Lee's surrender, he became the first American president to be assassinated. The night at Ford's Theater. On the evening of April 14, 1865, Abraham Lincoln attended a play titled Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater in Washington. He was joined by his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, and 2 guests, Major Henry Rathbone and his fiancée Clara Harris. The president was exhausted but had agreed to the night out as a brief escape from the pressures of war. At around 10:15 p.m., as the play reached a moment of loud laughter, a well-known actor and Confederate sympathizer named John Wilkes Booth quietly entered the presidential box. Booth was a passionate supporter of the Southern cause and believed that by killing Lincoln, he could avenge the South and inspire a resurgence of rebellion. With a small pistol, Booth shot Lincoln in the back of the head. He then jumped onto the stage and shouted what many believe was Sic Semper Tyrannis, Latin for "thus always to tyrants." He fled the theater, severely injuring his leg during the leap, but managed to escape into the night. Lincoln was carried across the street to a boarding house. He never regained consciousness. At 7:22 a.m. on April 15, 1865, he died. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, standing beside him, said, "Now he belongs to the ages." Shock, grief, and national mourning. News of Lincoln's assassination spread quickly and shocked the nation. Church bells rang. People wept openly in the streets. Even those who had once criticized him were devastated. The timing was especially cruel. Just as the country was beginning to heal, its leader was taken away. For the North, Lincoln's death felt like a deep personal loss. Cities held massive public funerals. Millions of Americans attended memorial services. In the South, reactions were mixed. Some Confederate supporters felt relief, while others understood that Lincoln's death might lead to harsher Reconstruction policies under new leadership. Lincoln's body was transported by train from Washington to his home in Springfield, Illinois. Along the journey, the funeral train stopped in multiple cities, including Philadelphia, New York, and Chicago, allowing thousands to pay their respects. It became one of the largest national mourning events in American history. John Wilkes Booth and the conspiracy. Lincoln's murder was not a random act, it was part of a larger plot. John Wilkes Booth, along with several co-conspirators, had planned to kill top members of the U.S. government, including Vice President Andrew Johnson and Secretary of State William Seward. Their goal was to throw the government into chaos and give the Confederacy a second chance. On the same night Lincoln was shot, one of Booth's accomplices attacked Secretary Seward in his home, stabbing him multiple times. Seward survived. The attempt to kill Johnson failed altogether. After fleeing the scene, Booth went into hiding. For 12 days, he evaded capture, moving through Maryland and Virginia. Union soldiers finally cornered him in a barn on April 26th. When he refused to surrender, the barn was set on fire. Booth was shot and killed by a Union soldier. Several of his co-conspirators were arrested, tried, and sentenced. 4 were hanged, including Mary Surratt, the first woman executed by the U.S. federal government. A legacy written in struggle and hope. Lincoln's legacy goes far beyond his tragic death. In life, he had already become a symbol of integrity, unity, and the fight for human dignity. His assassination sealed his place in history. Not just as a president, but as a national martyr. Here are some of the key elements of Lincoln's enduring legacy. 1. The preservation of the Union. Above all, Lincoln was committed to saving the United States. When Southern states seceded, many believed the Union could not survive. Lincoln's resolve kept the country together. His leadership through military crisis, political division, and moral uncertainty allowed the Union to endure. His belief in the permanence of the Union became a cornerstone of American democracy. Today, the idea that no state can secede from the U.S. rests heavily on Lincoln's example and legal arguments. 2. Emancipation and the end of slavery. Although Lincoln did not begin his presidency intending to end slavery everywhere, he grew into that role. His Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 redefined the Civil War as a fight for freedom. He then worked tirelessly to ensure the passage of the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery across the nation. He once said, "In giving freedom to the slave, we assure freedom to the free." This belief that the rights of one group are tied to the rights of all is part of what makes his vision timeless. 3. A model of humble leadership. Lincoln led with humility, humor, and compassion. He did not crave power or wealth. He listened to critics, changed his mind when necessary, and never claimed to be infallible. His open-door policy at the White House and his personal letters to soldiers and grieving families showed a president deeply connected to the people he served. In an age of division and ego, Lincoln stood apart. He led not with bluster but with thoughtfulness. His character has been a model for countless leaders across the world. 4. The power of words. Lincoln was not just a leader, he was a gifted writer and speaker. His Gettysburg Address, delivered in just 272 words, remains one of the most powerful expressions of American ideals ever written. His second inaugural address captured the pain of the war and the hope for reconciliation with unmatched grace. He knew that words could heal, inspire, and unite. His speeches still echo today in classrooms, political campaigns, and courtrooms. 5. A global symbol. Over time, Lincoln has become a symbol not just for Americans, but for people around the world. Statues of him stand in places as distant as London and Havana. His image is used to inspire movements for civil rights and democracy. Martin Luther King Jr. stood in front of the Lincoln Memorial when he delivered his "I Have a Dream" speech in 1963. Why does Lincoln resonate so deeply? Because his story is the story of rising from poverty, confronting injustice, and standing for unity in the face of division. He reminds people that leadership requires moral courage and that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. Abraham Lincoln's assassination was one of the most tragic events in American history, but it also marked the beginning of a legacy that would grow even stronger in his absence. His death was not the end of his influence. It was the beginning of a legend. He preserved the Union, helped end slavery, and redefined what it means to be American. He showed that leadership is not about ego, but about principle. And he reminded the world that democracy, while fragile, is worth fighting for. As Edwin Stanton said at his deathbed, "Now he belongs to the ages." Indeed, he does. The enduring legacy of Abraham Lincoln, a president for the ages. More than 150 years after his death, Abraham Lincoln remains one of the most revered figures in American history. His name is synonymous with unity, freedom, and leadership during crisis. His legacy goes beyond his life and even beyond his presidency. Lincoln's influence continues to shape American political thought, social progress, and the nation's sense of identity. His story is not just one of a man, but of a nation in transformation, and of ideals that never fade. Lincoln did not simply lead during a time of great national crisis. He redefined what America could and should be. Through his leadership, moral courage, and commitment to the Constitution and democracy, Lincoln left a legacy that endures in law, culture, and collective memory. A symbol of unity in division, Lincoln's most obvious and immediate legacy is the preservation of the United States as a single, unified nation. When he took office in 1861, the country was fractured, with southern states having seceded in protest against his election and in defense of slavery. Many believed the Union could not survive. Lincoln disagreed. He believed that the Constitution and the idea of a United States were sacred, and that no state had the right to destroy what the Founding Fathers had built. He fought not to punish the South, but to reunite the country. His insistence on unity gave the Union the moral strength to endure the Civil War and emerge stronger, though forever changed. Today, Lincoln remains a powerful symbol of what it means to hold a nation together during its darkest times. His example is often cited by leaders in moments of political polarization or national crisis, reminding Americans that unity does not require uniformity, but a shared commitment to common ideals. The champion of emancipation. One of Lincoln's most celebrated contributions is his role in ending slavery. Though he approached the issue cautiously early in his presidency, believing that preserving the Union was his primary task, Lincoln's views on slavery evolved over time. He recognized that the Civil War was not just a political battle, but a moral reckoning. His issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, followed by his tireless support for the 13th Amendment, changed the course of American history. He moved the country from compromise to conviction, helping to redefine freedom as a right for all, not a privilege for some. Although the Emancipation Proclamation did not end slavery by itself, it was a turning point. It shifted the war's purpose and transformed millions of enslaved people into agents of their own liberation. Lincoln gave them a stake in the future of the country and the country a chance to redeem itself. His legacy lives on in every civil rights movement that followed. Martin Luther King Jr. stood before the Lincoln Memorial when he declared, "I have a dream." Barack Obama, the first black U.S. president, often referenced Lincoln in his speeches and even took the oath of office using Lincoln's Bible. Defender of democracy and the Constitution. Lincoln's belief in democracy was unwavering. He understood that democracy is fragile and must be protected even when it is inconvenient or unpopular. He once said that the real test of a democracy is whether a government can maintain itself when its people freely vote a leader into power and others seek to destroy that choice by violence. By defending the results of the 1860 election and standing firm against secession, Lincoln sent a message that still resonates: elections matter. The peaceful transfer of power and the rule of law are not optional, they are the backbone of freedom. His careful expansion of presidential powers during wartime was controversial, but it was guided by a deep respect for the Constitution. He suspended habeas corpus in certain cases, raised armies, and took extraordinary steps to save the Union. Yet he never claimed to be above the law, and he always planned to return full powers to Congress and the courts once the war ended. His legacy, then, is not just about strong leadership, but about responsible leadership. He showed that even in times of crisis, the Constitution must guide, not be discarded. A master of language and moral clarity. Abraham Lincoln was a brilliant writer and orator, though he often spoke in plain, accessible language. He didn't rely on flowery rhetoric or theatrical delivery. Instead, he used logic, empathy, and moral clarity to move people's hearts and minds. His Gettysburg Address, spoken in just over 2 minutes, captured the essence of American democracy and the meaning of sacrifice. His second inaugural address, delivered just weeks before his death, reflected on slavery and war with honesty and humility, with malice toward none, with charity for all. These speeches are still studied today, not only in schools, but by world leaders, philosophers, and activists. Lincoln showed that great leadership involves not just action, but the ability to express the values that underpin those actions. His words live on because they speak to timeless principles: liberty, equality, justice, and the pursuit of a more perfect union. The common man who became president. Part of Lincoln's enduring appeal is his personal story. Born in a log cabin in rural Kentucky, raised in poverty, largely self-educated, and having failed in business and politics before achieving success, Lincoln's rise to the presidency is a classic tale of the American dream. He didn't come from privilege or money. He earned his reputation through honesty, hard work, and determination. This is why Lincoln is often called the man of the people. Americans from all walks of life have seen a bit of themselves in him. Someone who believed in fairness, opportunity, and resilience. His image, from the stovepipe hat to the gaunt, thoughtful face, remains instantly recognizable. His face on the penny and the $5 bill, his memorial in Washington, and his speeches etched in marble all serve as daily reminders of what is possible in a free society. Global influence. Lincoln's legacy isn't confined to the United States. Around the world, his life and leadership have inspired nations struggling with division, oppression, or civil conflict. Leaders from India to South Africa have cited Lincoln as an example of moral leadership. His legacy was studied by Mahatma Gandhi in the struggle for Indian independence. In Europe, he is admired as a champion of democratic values. Nelson Mandela kept a photograph of Lincoln in his office and saw parallels between their fights for justice and national healing. In many ways, Lincoln represents the best version of what democratic leadership can achieve, a reminder that power can be used not to dominate, but to liberate and to unite. The ongoing conversation. Of course, Lincoln's legacy is not without complexity or debate. Historians continue to analyze his motivations and decisions, particularly on race. He did not begin as an abolitionist. His early plans included colonization efforts, encouraging freed slaves to resettle outside the United States. An idea now viewed as misguided and racially insensitive. However, what sets Lincoln apart is his capacity for growth. He listened. He learned. He changed. Over time, he moved closer to the ideals he had long expressed in theory. That evolution makes his legacy even more meaningful. It reminds us that people and nations can progress even when their beginnings are flawed. Lincoln's story isn't about perfection. It's about striving toward a more just and inclusive society, step by step. A legacy that lives. Abraham Lincoln's legacy is visible everywhere, in the reunified states of America, in the abolition of slavery, in civil rights movements, in political thought, in education, and even in pop culture. His image and ideals continue to inspire books, films, speeches, and protests. When Americans talk about a government of the people, by the people, for the people, they are quoting Lincoln. When they work to ensure equality under the law, they walk a path he helped pave. In times of turmoil, whether during war, civil unrest, or political division, leaders and citizens alike return to Lincoln's wisdom. His moral compass, humility, and ability to articulate national purpose are as relevant today as they were in the 1860s. Conclusion: the president who lives on. Abraham Lincoln died in 1865, but his spirit never left. His life, cut short by an assassin's bullet, became a powerful symbol of sacrifice and vision. He is remembered not only for what he accomplished, but for what he stood for: liberty, unity, democracy, and human dignity. His enduring legacy teaches us that leadership is not about personal gain or short-term success. It's about serving others, standing firm in the face of injustice, and working toward a better future even when the road is hard. Lincoln once said, "The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present." As our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew. His words still challenge us to rise to the occasion, to meet each generation's moment with courage, and to keep striving toward that more perfect union. Indeed, Lincoln doesn't just belong to the history books. He belongs to the living story of America. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives into history, and ring that bell icon so you never miss an upload. Let us know in the comments. What part of Lincoln's legacy do you think is most important today? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks so much for watching, and remember, history isn't just about the past, it's about understanding who we are now. Until next time, stay curious,